Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is David O'Brien. I'm a researcher at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society. I also work with Salil on our Privacy Tools for Sharing Research Data project. And it's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce all of you to our panelists in our second to last session for the day. So starting on the far left, we have Danny Weitzner. Danny is the director of the Decentralized Information Group at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. He teaches Internet Public Policy in MIT's Computer Science Department. And Danny has also served as U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer for Internet Policy in the White House and co-founded the Center for Democracy and Technology. To the right of Danny is Nick Sinai. Nick is currently a venture partner in Venture Insight Partners and a Walter Shorenstein Media and Democracy Fellow at the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Just up into this last December, Nick served as the U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer in the White House, and there he led numerous initiatives related to big data, and open government. To Nick's right is Kobbi Nissim. Kobbi is a visiting scholar at the Center for Research on Computation Society at the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at Ben-Gurion University. He specializes in differential privacy, private data analysis, and secure computation. And finally, but definitely not least, to the right of Kobbi is Latanya Sweeney. Latanya is a professor of government and technology in residence at Harvard's Department of Government. She also directs the Data Privacy Lab at Harvard. Latanya is a renowned computer scientist and scholar, in particular in the fields of data privacy and policy. And just this last year, she took leave from Harvard to serve as the chief technologist at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. So why don't you all join me in welcoming our panelists before I kick it over to Danny.
So thanks, David. Thanks, Salil. Thanks to everyone here who's organized a wonderful conference. I realized there's only one person, Kobbi, who has not worked in the U.S. government. That's kind of alarming. What is going on here? But maybe you will one day. You never know. So we have the somewhat daunting task of wrapping up this very engaging conference. And I want to just remind everyone where we started this morning, aside from starting with Edward Snowden and Bruce Schneier, we started with the proposition that society needs new conceptions of privacy. So you've all been thinking about that question, no doubt, today, and the panel has also all been thinking about that question today. And I think what I want to do is start by just asking everyone on the panel, just what sort of privacy does society demand now, based on what we've heard, and what's new? Is based on what we've heard, are things different somehow? Is the way we think about privacy somehow different, or is it really just the same and we have to do it better? So I'm going to go right around the horn and start with Nick, and then we'll continue.
Great. Well, thanks, Danny, for moderating, and thank you all for having me here. About 20 years ago, I was actually a freshman sitting in the back taking, I think Chem 5 was taught here. And so it's really fantastic to be back at Harvard. So what has changed? I guess I will give context from the federal government and our My Data initiatives, which seek to give citizens and people who do business with the federal government access to their data back. And I think that's really, I'm not the privacy expert that you guys are. We have kind of just some of the world's leading thinkers in privacy. But my understanding is that data access, or access to your own data, has always been a part of privacy, but mostly in the context of being able to see what the government or the company has, and the right to correct it, and maybe the right to erase it. But what I would suggest is the ability to get access to your own data in a easy to understand and a machine readable format, and the ability to transfer it kind of consumer mediated to parties that you wish should be something that we add to this idea of privacy in an internet age. And so this is something that we're working on, or we were, I should stop using we, that the federal government is working on through their My Data initiatives. So the federal government collects a fair amount of data about you in a number of different systems that are traditionally really well protected. And when you want to get that data back, it's often really challenging. You have a legal right to it with the Privacy Act, but you have to write them a piece of paper and they send you back that piece of information. So the Blue Button Initiative is a great example. The Department of Veterans Affairs made it possible for veterans to download their own prescription data information. And the reason that's important is veterans get about half their care outside the VA system, and being able to have a list of prescriptions and take that to a doctor outside the VA system helps prevent misprescriptions and putting veterans into the ER. And so something that simple as being able to give veterans their own prescription data was really the foundation of a lot of the thinking. And Danny's one of the leading privacy thinkers, and Latanya in privacy in the federal government. And so another quick example, and then I'll turn over to the rest of the panel, is the IRS. So the IRS gets about 80 million phone calls a year, and it's really three things: is where's my check? Are you still after me? Or I need a piece of information. And that piece of information is usually a piece of information that I have as a taxpayer, or my tax company has submitted to the IRS. And so being able to get that in a usable, machine-readable, and portable format, I think is something that we should be thinking about. So the IRS, with the name Get Transcript, so it's not a really useful marketing name, and really no marketing, launched the Get Transcript initiative in 2014. 17 million Americans downloaded their own tax information, and the call volume went down by 40% at the IRS. Which is pretty impressive and leads to a fair amount of savings of your tax dollars. And where the IRS wants to go is to this idea of being able to really get a usable format and something that you can affirmatively transfer to your accountant or to your bank or perhaps to a lender. So I think that vision of usable and portability is something that I'd like to add to the privacy discussion.
Okay. Kobbi, what do we need and what's new?
Yeah, I think what's new has several issues, and they are related to accessibility of data, the ability to collect a lot of data, very detailed data, all the time, and the entrance of new players to this arena. In the past, these were mainly government agencies that could collect a lot of information about individuals, and now we have a lot of corporates that can do that for economic reasons. And I believe that this threatens balances that existed before in society, in economic balances and political balances, and we need a whole new understanding of privacy in order to restore these balances, to find new remedies in case where these balances were corrupted, and privacy is certainly one of the issues we have to deal with here.
So let me just ask, and Latanya will come to you, but you suggest, Kobbi, that we have a change in the balance of power as to information. From the survey data that we heard from Lee Rainey just in the previous presentation, Lee, you'll tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but it doesn't actually seem to me that the public is saying that they want a different balance of power as to the government. They might want a difference of balance of power as to companies. It seems like there's certainly a lower level of trust for companies and a sense of being out of control. But as I recall, one of Lee's slides, it suggested that the level of concern that people have about too much data held by different entities, I think the government was way down on the bottom of the level of concern.
Yeah, I think probably the main change is with respect to commercial entities, but I think also with respect to government agencies, the NSA in particular, there seems to be a change in the public opinion with respect to how much power they have, how much information they are being collected, and how they're using it. So I believe that probably in the next years we will start to see this change with respect to government information.
And certainly Lee's data suggested that the younger segments of the population were more concerned about government abuse than older segments of the population. So Latanya, what are we demanding now, do you think, what should we demand as a society, and is it a question of looking at things differently or just kind of reaffirming what have been our traditional values and approaches?
Well, the statement is an oxymoron all by itself. You know, I had a fantastic time at the FTC. I learned a tremendous amount. It was the first time of really harmonizing, a view that tried to harmonize technology, society, business, and so forth. And what I find fascinating is that this situation that we have, this relationship between technology and society, privacy and security are just the beginning. Every fundamental value that Americans hold is being redefined by technology design. It's the choice of the design, it's the choice of how the technology works that is going to challenge every law we have, from voting to disparate impact. These are the kinds of things that were being discussed at the White House, in White House forums, as well as in FTC workshops and so forth, about the just sheer breadth of issues that are totally being changed. And we haven't done a good job with privacy and security. And fundamentally, we haven't done it for three reasons. One is the main architect or the main designer or policymaker is actually the students who go out to the technology company and make technology. They have so much power. An arbitrary decision. They're not doing it on purpose. It's not that computer scientists are evil. It's that we don't train them to do better. We don't train them to think about societal impact on the technology they design. You know, I often use the example of the Sony camcorder not having a mute button and the dramatic impact that that's caused on this conflict in the United States between it's okay to videotape people, but it's not okay under wiretap laws to get their sound recording. And with no mute button, these are totally confused, and it's caused all kinds of chaos with people going, you know, with parents videotaping abuse of their children facing felony charges and not the abuser, for example. And so that's what I mean about the power of technology design. So one thing that we really do need to do is to help at least some computer scientists, or maybe it's a new discipline, about how do we architect the digital society? How do we harmonize technology with society, with the values that we hold dear? You know, I couldn't help but this morning hearing Snowden talk 2 years before 9/11. I was among a group of professors who were approached by the Department of Defense who were concerned about an attack on US soil. And they insisted that we build a surveillance system with privacy. Because after all, as one of the generals said, if nothing happens, we'll be court-martialed if this thing doesn't have provable anonymity, isn't provably private. And what was so fascinating wasn't that we weren't able to do it. What was fascinating is the minute 9/11 happened, everyone threw the privacy piece overboard. And I find that really kind of amazing, because it's no different than our youth who or any of us who run to Waze to get through traffic a little bit faster, who wear the latest device because you want to keep in touch, what we're willing to trade off. But there's no one architecting, thinking about what are our values, what does this mean in a democratic society, how do we put the right bells and whistles in place?
So let me ask you to follow up on that, all of you. One of the really striking observations that Edward Snowden made this morning to me in discussion with Bruce was Snowden said something to the effect that cryptography and mathematics are a foundation that we can trust. that they behave in predictable ways. Mostly, he did add the caveat if implemented properly. But I think that there's a very serious view articulated there that we need this foundation of provable security underneath all of our interactions. And I detect a certain tension, I think, in the discussions in our technical communities, in the online civil liberties community, about what's the right balance between relying on sort of provably secure cryptographic techniques to protect privacy on the one hand, and law and institutions on the other hand to protect privacy. We're having this debate, as you know, about end-to-end encryption and the effect on the ability to do electronic surveillance. Underneath that is, in some part, a view that says we can't actually quite trust our government or our legal system or our institutions in the private sector anymore. We need this kind of cryptographic guarantee for our privacy underneath. How do you think we're going to sort this out? Is this a question of balance? Is it a question of choosing one or the other?
So I just totally I've grown to dislike this idea that I have to balance these things, I have to choose one or the other, this privacy utility, this cryptography versus law thing, because the best solutions are when you confuse them. So John said this morning, he says, look, we need a cross-disciplinary approach. He brought him in it, and he talked about it in terms of people. I'm talking about it in terms of the thing that you end up with. It has to be blended. Otherwise, it's not going to work. You can't it's not going to be a technique or a tool that's going to save the day, and it's not going to be a law that's going to save the day. And if those two things don't come together in an architected way, it's never going to work.
Let me build on that and challenge you only slightly. I think that there are some leading companies that are starting to build privacy into product design, because that's what you're talking about in the context of young folks who graduate from here and then go off and be a part of the next internet startup. There are some of them, right now it's too few of them, that are actually thinking about privacy and security in the context of designing their system, their service, their product. I do see the other side much more often, especially in my day job, or my other day job. And too often companies think of privacy as the privacy policy rather than that really integrated approach where it is part of the integrated user experience. And as any great company should be constantly trying to improve that user experience. And I think it is understanding those nuances. And so this is where I worry when we come back to the policy side, is essentially two-factor authentication has been the policy in the executive branch, and the president reaffirmed that. And that's fantastic. But how it's implemented, and when you ask for that second factor in the user experience, you could see that being done in every time you're already on a trusted device and trusted browser, and in a way that ultimately ruins the experience and makes it impossible for the user to accomplish the task. So understanding that in the context of that digital service or that internet company is so important, and that's why I'm excited about the U.S. digital service at the White House and the new VA digital service, both of which are hiring. And they are thinking about how privacy and security gets integrated into the design. And so when you start doing from the user research phase to the early prototype to iterating and building a service and continuing to a part where you replace a legacy electronic band-aid of a solution, privacy and security have to be integrated throughout all of that. And you certainly have to have the accountability checks and all of that. So I see glimmers of hope, but I take your point that too often it is just the privacy policy.
Can I just...
I totally agree with you that privacy has to be designed and security has to be designed into the system. Things don't work otherwise. But I want to highlight that this success of cryptography, that mathematics works, should teach us that also with other issues of security, including privacy, we should shoot for mathematically sound solutions, not heuristics, not things that we believe are or have a good chance, thank you, Cynthia, have a good feeling that they work well and so on. We actually need the math to work correctly, so we're sure that maybe after implementation, things are fine. And yet, privacy is a very multi-layered problem. It's not that technology alone is going to solve the problem. I agree totally with that. There are tons of issues, incentives, and certainly the law system that we build. We need to re-architect not only the technology, we need to re-architect a lot of things around the privacy problem, economic incentives, the regulations, and we need to understand how all these components work together with technology in order to provide a good solution. So I think in terms of, if you were asking, do we need a new privacy? Certainly we need a new notion of privacy that manages to take all this very complex problem and deal with it.
And so where is the initiative going to come from for this? I mean, Nick, you paint a compelling story about parts of the federal government that look at their relationship with the citizens, their customers, as it were, and say, well, we've got to do things differently. Where's the leadership going to come from on this, do you think?
I think
is it just going to emerge, or is everything just going to happen, provided we, train our students well to answer these questions?
I think some of the initiative would come from academia, as it has come so far. Some of it will come from research organizations. But we still, I believe, lack incentives for some of the big organizations who collect data, companies and the government, to push forward these solutions. And we need to find ways to incentivize these organizations to actually invest in privacy and in funding solutions and so on.
I just want to make clear that I'm not advocating even just putting, privacy by design into technologies. I think that's extremely limited. One of the things that happened at the FTC that was really interesting is the perception of a technology is the way it's packaged in a business product. That's amazing, because you could have packed in a lot of great privacy, but when the venture capitalists got to it, they stripped that out. They made their business product around something else that was totally orthogonal to that concern, which has another privacy concern. And that's the thing that the FTC may have to address. And so I certainly don't mean that we can only infuse it. It's kind of a three-pronged levels. It had to be there in the beginning to even be on the business practices model. The business case, you can't not get privacy to work unless there's a business case. How do you make the business case? Either you have to make it economically or you have to make it through regulation or legal.
So I might be getting a little pessimistic here, because what you've all said is, you've all articulated in some way or another a privacy by design view that you've said, Latanya, that privacy has to be part of the architecture. Well, we have a lot of systems out there. I mean, we have a lot of infrastructure out there. We have an entire world of internet services, of search engines, of social networks, of electronic medical record systems, you name it, of the IRS, are you saying that do we have to start from scratch?
They're all collapsing. Every single one of them is collapsing. Every single one of them is headed for a major disaster. Every single one of them. There's not a single thing that you just said that is not going to cause us the kind of calamity that we saw, that we've heard of with NSA, that we're just going to have one surprise after another until we do come to grips. At the same time, the technology is changing. He's talking about two-factor authentication. In 2 years, your chair will be able to tell it's you sitting there. Okay?
Unless I lose a lot of weight. I'm working on it.
It'll know that too.
Yeah.
It might remind you, in fact.
Yeah.
When are you going to lose some weight? That's right.
My chair.
That's mine. So none of you have actually. Well, Latanya, you've offered an answer for what's new. You've said if we don't really think more seriously about the design and the architecture, and I think your proposition is we just didn't really do that enough. And Nick, you've kind of said that actually what's new is access, and this is in fact consistent with some of Lee's findings that it seemed like Lee's point number one was people care about control of their data, and I think you're saying we care about control of your data. Do you think that's going to continue? This idea of giving people more access to their data? It seems like the information environment we're in is only increasingly complicated.
Well, I do think that paths to the sort of, I call it the sweet spot, the place where society can enjoy the benefit of the technology with protections, with provable protections or with certain kinds of guarantees. And when I'm talking about architecting, I don't mean architecting the technology, I mean architecting the society that uses that technology. I don't mean just architecting the technology.
Can you give an example?
Right, it has to be how that law, how it's all going to fit together. It's not that NSA needs a new privacy tool, though they probably do, could use them, but how does that tool fit in with everything else? They're in compliance. He made that really clear. But you know what? Could he have gotten the same utility with better privacy protections? And what's the incentive to use that better privacy? That would be the architecting question.
So with respect to compliance, we have to remember that a lot of the regulations that we live in today were designed in a completely different era where there wasn't so much information around that agencies could and companies could access. And so it may be that we're in total compliance with the law and with the current regulations, and still we have damaged privacy severely. Okay, so one of the issues that has to be looked at as part of this architecturing
so you're
the
saying,
society.
notwithstanding the fact, you're accepting that John has said, well, the NSA was following the law. You've both accepted
Yeah, I believe
But
that
you're-
this is a true statement.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that the law has not correctly articulated what we value when it comes to privacy, somehow. Because if you've said
Or provided the proper incentives. I think HIPAA is a better example. Of what? It might be, of a lack of an incentive. So, PricewaterhouseCoopers says that the secondary use of health data is a $10 billion market. That's huge. That's just a huge market. Everybody wants to know about your health, right? And so how is HIPAA architect? Well, as a policy, it says, these are the fields that you have to redact. And if you redact this, you can put the information on the web. You can give it to anyone. You don't need anyone's permission to do so. Suppose Cynthia and Kobbi come up with a differential private solution in healthcare for 80% of the data sharing under that. There's zero incentive to use it, because the model that's being used right now may have weaknesses that are being exploited by other companies. Why? There's no incentive in the way HIPAA is orchestrated that says, oh, we can do better, so let's move the bar. So one of the problems that we do see in these policies is that they've always been void of this kind of, I want to put the carrot in, I want the carrot to keep going.
So how do you do that? You guys are the two smartest people I know on this topic. How do you develop a continuous learning privacy regime I realize the Consumer Bill of Rights is much more of a horizontal approach, but if you take HIPAA or FERPA or COPPA or something that is much more of a focused industry regime, which admittedly has a lot of challenges, how do you turn that into something that is more of a continuous learning or algorithmic kind of regime, if that's the right way to think about it, that gives incentives for the industry that it regulates on privacy to continually improving and use the best math, the best differential privacy, the best, et cetera?
So since you've become the moderator, I will take off my moderator. I appreciate it. So you'll allow me to answer the question, which is great. I think that I could say that the way that the Obama administration approached the question of privacy leading up to the issuing of the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights had as much to do with process as it did to do with substance. So the substance of the rights articulated in the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights that President Obama said everyone should be entitled to have, that Congress should pass, that companies should pay attention to, those were, I think, kind of a modest update of a traditional fair information practice principles in privacy, but not a radical departure. I think what was actually significant was more on the process side. It was more saying we have actually been in the process since about the mid-90s of evolving our thinking on privacy. Now, we obviously haven't gotten all the way there yet, and this is a theory that's very much influenced by work done by Deirdre Mulligan and Kenny Bamberger at the Berkeley I School and Law School. They have a marvelous paper that everyone who cares about privacy should read. It's called Privacy on the Books, Privacy on the Ground. And their thesis is that, ironically enough, even though in the US we do not have a comprehensive privacy protection law, as Europe does, in fact, in some ways, because of the fact that we do not have a comprehensive privacy protection law, we are in a continuous cycle of putting pressure on companies like Google, pressure on companies like Facebook, pressure on other companies that are under the authority of the Federal Trade Commission, but don't actually have any specific privacy obligations. It's a very odd situation. The companies that are regulated by HIPAA, by Gramm-Leach-Bliley, the financial so-called privacy law, actually have this really easy, because all they have to do is follow the rules as they were written 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. It's the companies that have no rules, that are visible, that have to deal with regulators and customers all the time, who are under constant pressure. Some people will say, well, they're not under enough pressure, and I think that's probably true, but they are under real pressure, and if you look at the way that privacy practices have evolved in the US, we have a real discussion going about what privacy means, and an evolution of those practices. The reason I asked the question about where the leadership is going to come from, is it just going to come because we get smarter about architecture and technology, or is that I don't think Congress in the next 6 months is going to enact comprehensive privacy legislation. I hate to break it to everyone. And so we're in a very complicated environment now where I think you do have, frankly, and that's both true on the commercial side and it's probably true on the intelligence side as well. So you have some people I think who sort of fall back to the predictability of math and say, well, let's just make sure everything is, locked up as tightly as possible with technical measures that we can control. And then you have a more complex environment in which our privacy practices are evolving, but as you've all suggested, without exactly a clear incentive structure about how to move forward.
Well, I would say that first of all, the lowest hanging fruit is just a huge dose of transparency would go a long way. You have my data, you have personal data, you have my data, I want to know where it went. Stuff like that. Just simple transparency stuff is just kind of a policy thing. That would then allow us to know, gee, there's a lot of harm out there. Because right now you don't know the harm because it's all hidden. But if you made things more transparent, you would be able to actually assess harm. Now, that's not necessarily in the White House interest, but just in a kind of a FTC kind of interest. Well, but the other thing, too, is, when I say architect the society, I really mean that. I'm thinking, like, this is the new 1776, where you really have to think really big, really bold. It's a whole new world. And sooner or later, it's going to happen because one by one, whether you're talking disparate impact under discrimination, whether you're talking voter rights, whether you're talking anything that you deem part of a democratic society is being redefined by technology and has to be reassessed. And yes, on some level, I do think that the Federal Trade Commission, many of you may know, I do think the Federal Trade Commission should become the Federal Technology Commission. They should have a Bureau of Technologists because it's increasingly difficult for them to do their job too without having the same kind of insight into it. But fundamentally, it's a business problem too. is not really a technology. You can make all the nice math. We can make beautiful upside-down A's and backwards E's that work inside of machines.
I think that was a dig.
But if there's not a business case, what is the business case going to do? And that goes, and so that's part of that architecting.
So I'm going to ask the panel a final question, then I want to go to questions from the audience. I want to know whether you're optimistic. I certainly believe that privacy is essential to our democracy. I think it's essential to the development of our culture. I think it's essential just to human flourishing. I think if we don't have a real sense of privacy in our lives, of a private sphere in our lives, of a sense that we're not under constant threat through surveillance, I think people's lives will be distorted and diminished. And so it's an important question. My question for all of you is, are you optimistic that we're heading or continuing in the direction of a positive sense of privacy, of a sense that the dignity of ourselves as individuals can be maintained, or are we heading, again, I keep looking to Lee, who offers so much data, in a somewhat pessimistic direction where people feel increasingly out of control? Are you optimistic, Nick?
Yes.
Why?
What are you optimistic about?
I'm just by nature optimistic.
That's a good start.
So the thing that frustrates me is complexity and the user experience. And I think this is, if I can diverge from my usual optimism.
That was quick.
Because I am really excited about I mean, because I spend time with entrepreneurs and I see their visions for changing the world, and I do think that they are starting to think about this in ways better than they did 10 or 15 years ago. And so I think that's really exciting, and there is some cause for optimism there, because ultimately entrepreneurs do, and in the social sector as well, help change the world. So that's why I am optimistic. I am frustrated because of complexity, and when you just think about I think about the user accounts and passwords, and I know we're moving to, I know all of that, but on the day-to-day level, the complexity frustrates me and makes my life really challenging. And I think about the need for a quick and easy fix for things is what we always kind of look towards, and those often are privacy or security disabling or undercutting, which I'm sure you guys have been talking about a lot today. So complexity is a real killer in terms when you think about the user experience.
Kobbi, are you optimistic?
So if Nick was optimistic by nature, I was trained as a cryptographer, so I'm paranoid by nature. And I'm afraid that there is a good chance that we're beyond that tipping point where things have changed dramatically. It would be very hard to take things back, in spite of a lot of development in technology and understanding of privacy. But on the positive side, I think the increased interest in privacy and the fact that so many people are studying and thinking about it could teach us maybe ways to get around some of the problems in a way that if we understand, for instance, how privacy played in our lives in balancing this very complex picture, maybe we could re-inject some technological and other remedies in order to get back to somewhere reasonable, maybe without privacy as we know it today, or the way we knew privacy 10 years ago, but with other solutions.
Are you optimistic?
Well, I don't know what optimism means. I'm just a little computer scientist or a social scientist. But I absolutely agree with Kobbi. The genie is out of the bottle. You're not taking the data out of the hands of the zillions of companies that now have that data, who are making money, who monetize that data. So it forces us to rethink privacy. And privacy of the 1950s is not the privacy we have today, and it's not the privacy our children will have tomorrow. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that privacy is dead either, because that's not a society we can actually sustain either. And so it does require a tremendous rethinking. And there's lots of hope for this rethinking. Recently, I used the example that, increasingly I see companies, so privacy is kind of, in the world that I live in with dealing with businesses often, privacy is a sword and a shield. So when the company wants your data, they are using a sword to get your data. When somebody wants data from them, oh no, I've got privacy concerns. And so this idea of the company having privacy concerns is actually leading to a kind of privacy. So for example, it's really hard to get, lots of data out of Facebook. For some people, to get data out, and others different. But for some of us, it's harder to get data out of Facebook or out of Google. They're much more likely to give us an API or allow us to stick an algorithm over their firewall to run on their data and give us back an answer. And this is kind of interesting, because meanwhile, all the other places are just giving out data. That was a kind of paradigm. And so you see this kind of, you start to see this shift happening. And big data brings forward more of that, because it's just simply hard to copy the entire fire hose of Twitter, for example.
So I think before we go to questions, I'll say, since some of you were only sort of diffidently optimistic, I'm going to be wholeheartedly optimistic. I think the thing that I've seen that I'm most optimistic about is, I think that transparency really is working in our favor in the long run. There's no doubt there is a huge amount of data out there, and I agree with all of you that we're not going to really fundamentally change the direction of that flow anytime soon, simply because it has too much utility for too many reasons, personal, economic, et cetera. But I'm optimistic that I think that we're getting better and better as a society in doing exactly the kind of architectural thinking that you're talking about, Latanya, because we're looking hard at the data that we have, and we're looking hard at institutions like the NSA and asking hard questions. It's only been a year or so since the Snowden revelations. I think that we are at the beginning of a long cycle of trying to really think through what we expect from our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement agencies, and how we make sure they can do their job without risking totalitarian tendencies in the future. But I think we can get there. I think we got there, at least as an American society, and European societies have got there as well after these sort of cataclysms that happened. But it takes time. The first revelations about FBI abuse in the 1960s happened in the mid-60s, and we didn't have the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act until 1978. I think it's going to take time, but I think we're in a really serious conversation. And I think what's good about the privacy conversation now is we moved on from what I consider to be, frankly, largely nuisance issues. I'll be controversial. I think a lot of the privacy and marketing issues are to a large extent nuisance questions. I think the really hard questions are, how powerful should the government be? How powerful should big organizations, private organizations, Amazon, eBay, Google, et cetera, Facebook be? Are they treating people unfairly with that power? And I think partly because of the big data conversations that the White House started a year ago, we're now focused on these much more salient questions like, are people being treated fairly? Are they being discriminated against? I think that because we have the power of transparency, because ultimately it is possible to look inside these systems and know what's happening and observe what's happening, I think we'll get to the right place. So any questions from either optimists or pessimists out there? Optimists preferred, but do we have microphones or? Yes.
Right here is fine.
Over here, please.
Should I?
And this.
One of my favorite analogies, which I first heard from Dr. Cynthia at work, is the analogy between the privacy agenda and the green agenda, the eco-friendly agenda, especially in terms of the incentives, as Professor Sweeney talked about. That the green agenda had no incentives to go on. The industry, much like companies or the NSA, say, why should we care about privacy? It'll ruin our utility. Much like in the green agenda, they say, why should we care about the environment? People are going to get fired. So I'd like to hear your viewpoint about the similarities and differences between the two agendas and about the possibilities that the privacy agenda can learn from what has been done with the green agenda.
Good question.
It's an interesting analogy, and there are, I think, there are some parallels in that, look, clean energy is actually a really fast-growing part of the energy market. And part of that is because of subsidies, but a larger part of it is because it is actually cost-effective. And so energy efficiency is actually the most cost-effective fuel, for example, right, in the clean energy portfolio. And so the reason that clean energy is moving so quickly is because it makes money, frankly. And I am optimistic that more and more Americans kind of will, their behavior and their choices will make it so that companies see a profit motive in building the kind of privacy and security into their systems.
So I think another important analogy is the climate change debate now has traction because we can measure impact. We can measure seawater rise. We can measure changes in atmospheric chemistry. We can make predictions. We can model at least some notion of how that chemistry will change and what effect it will have. One of the other reasons I'm very optimistic about where we are in privacy is because of all the work of people like Cynthia and Salil and others here who work, Kobbi, who work on differential privacy. It's actually a way to measure impact. The work that we do in my lab on accountable systems is another way to measure the behavior of systems. The privacy debate has been, in the past, too much ideology and not enough concreteness and quantitative measures, formal measures. And I think the fact that we now have that we can now talk about trade-offs, whether it's with epsilon budgets or other kinds of trade-offs. And I first learned this from Latanya, by the way, when you were writing your dissertation. I think that's a really significant change, and it will mean that we can have a real debate that's mature the way that the climate change debate is mature. We argue about whether those models are right, but at least we're arguing about something tangible, measurable, that has some scientific basis behind it.
So, Danny, I'm the only one on this panel who can say I'm not a scientist.
I'm sorry.
So I completely agree with you about the need to be able to measure privacy and consequences. And this is an area where we so far lack a lot of information. We don't really know what the effects of this leakage of information actually causes. But I think there's one major thing that has to be changed with respect to the use of information if we want to compare it to the environmental example, and which is in the environment, the leakage or the spill was a byproduct of what people were trying to produce. In the arena of information, it currently seems that the leakage is what is the product, is what they're aiming for. And this is something I don't think this is fundamental. I think that mathematical theory shows that in many cases you don't have to have all that spill in order to compute those things that you want to compute. And we need to see this change in the way information is being treated so that the analogy would work.
I would say that I agree. I would put it even in business terms, it's desirable to have the data leakage, as you might frame it, because other businesses have spawned onto it. You know, the cost of collecting data is almost zero, and so therefore it's easier to collect it and figure out uses for it later. Privacy is a process that requires you being much more selective or slowing down access to that data or filtering that data in some way. And as long as the cost of collection is really low, people will do that. So it makes a fundamentally different proposition than greenhouse, because the greenhouse problem is that the value, there's no one there, there's no financial way to represent the environment. And so we have to augment that, we have to augment it in the equation with policies, with subsidies and things like that. If you're in the business of making a privacy appliance or a privacy service or something like that, then the analogy does hold. But the incentives can, if you expose the harms, then lawsuits alone, then between lawsuits and other kinds of remedies on the harms will force fundamental change.
So we have time for just one more quick question right here. Quick question, and we'll have quick answers.
Hi. So to follow up on that, and entrepreneurs and innovation, so necessity is the mother of invention, and again, with the green tech or the clean tech analogy, once there is a policy, a law that say 20% of your energy has to come from renewable sources, there is a ton of innovation that comes on from everywhere to fill that. Big companies as well as a lot of it is from entrepreneurs. So in privacy, I don't see legal representation on the panel, but the U.S. legal system is lagging maybe 20 years or more behind what is happening today, and it is extremely complex. And we were addressing mostly privacy in network world, mostly the consumer side of when we use various services like Google and Facebook online, but every one of us, like most of us, work in corporate America, and every one of us signs an employment agreement with that company, completely giving away our privacy rights. And when I talk to people about it, they say, but otherwise I won't get a job. However, if the company were prohibited from forcing you to do that, there will be a lot of innovation that comes up of how to protect your privacy, whether you're at home or at work, and so on. So Mike, I don't know if this is a question or an observation, but what are the steps that as a society we should take in order to accelerate this process, given how you all mentioned, it's very complex. People don't understand it. A lot of people are not aware they're giving away their privacy when they browse online or just when they go to work every day or work from home.
Quick answers.
Okay, quick answer.
Thanks.
The way to speed track it is definitely through more transparency. So, you know, there are these anecdotal examples of banks taking advantage of you, and if it were known that what data do they actually use, if that was transparent, it would allow lawsuits and things like that, and it would change.
I totally agree with the idea that we need to find ways to incentivize innovation in the area of privacy. Law and regulation could be one way of doing it. I think there are probably other ways that would go with it.
Nick, you have the last word.
Yeah, just building capacity in our regulatory institutions on the anti-discrimination, on the consumer protection. That's one of the things that the Big Data report called for, and I think we need to recruit the best and brightest from here to do their tour of duty in those kinds of regulatory consumer protection agencies.
Thank you all. Thanks to the panel.
That was fun.
Brings us to the end. I would like to thank our speakers. I thought that the talks were very enlightening and entertaining. Our panelists, our moderators, our volunteers, and everybody who worked on this. Thank you very much.